Hey guys, Jim here. And back a little bit when I first got my Curtis F3, a few people had asked me to do a side-by-side comparison with an XM-18. And I was waiting and waiting and waiting, and my XM-18 finally arrived today, fresh off of Rick Hinderer's workbench. So I've got the newest generation, and I'm going to do kind of a side-by-side comparison for those that maybe can't afford to own both or just can't justify owning two somewhat expensive knives that are so similar they'd rather pick one, whichever one's going to be best for their needs. And I figured this way we can do a real side-by-side, get a good look at them. I'll give you my feedback and the things that I think where one may excel over the other. You may agree or disagree, but at least the information is there and you can make an informed decision on your own. So first we'll put them side-by-side here in the closed position. And you'll notice already that the Hinderer, even though these are both the 3.5-inch variations, the Hinderer is already going to start looking a little bit bigger. And mainly it's going to be because of the handle size. The Hinderer gives you a larger handle and it fills your hand a little bit better. When we get them open, and you'll notice once again, we'll go into that again, the one's a good flipper and one's just called a flipper. And putting them kind of nose to nose, you'll see that once again, the Hinderer is still going to come out a little bit bigger. It does have, honestly, from pivot to pivot, the Hinderer blade's a little bit longer. Exposed area, you've got just about the same. Cutting surface, the plus goes to the Curtis F3. Now, that again could be a plus or minus for different people. For those that want the extra cutting surface, the F3 is great. For those that really want to have a forward choil in order to do more detailed and more controlled work, then the Hinderer is going to win. They both have similar blades. Obviously, Rick Hinderer is the one that created the Spanto blade, his combination of a Tanto blade and a spear point in one blade. And then Dave Curtis has a similar profile, but I don't know if, I think my lighting is good enough here to highlight that grind. If you'll notice, on the Hinderer, the main grind leans forward toward the top of the grind. On Dave's, it leans a little bit rearward toward the top of the grind. You have a more prominent flat on the F3, and it's a little more rounded on the Hinderers. And I think that's basically because Dave's grinding these by hand, and I don't know to what degree. I think this is an initial machine cut, and then it's fine-tuned and final edges put on by hand. I don't believe the entire grind was done by hand. I don't know this. There's certainly much more authoritative people out there on Hinderer than myself, so I'm not going to pretend to know something that I don't know. But judging by the radius of the flats where they intersect with the grinds, it's definitely a lot softer. This is much more clearly defined. And also because Dave is stonewashing the grinds. It's all stonewashed. It's still stonewashed on the flats, but he does a light polish across the flats as well, and that gives you a little bit of reflectivity. I think, honestly, this is a nicer blade. They're both equally sharp. I've kind of played with them both to ascertain that. So there you go. We get into the handle materials, and here's where I think the value really comes in. If you buy an XM-18 directly from Rick Hinderer, you pay $385 plus shipping, so you pay $395. We'll call that $400. The Curtis F3 is $500, so it's $100 more. However, this is titanium on both sides. The Hinderer is titanium only on the lock side. You have a thin titanium frame with the G10 scale. Now, if you want to have the full titanium look on the Hinderer, you can achieve that. It's been a few months since they were available, but every now and then you come across the titanium scale. That's $200. Now you would have $600 invested in this or $500 invested in this. So in that way, I believe the Curtis is a greater value. Just overall, component for component, I think it's a better value. The other thing is Dave's incredible pivot, the spot pivot. So it's got a massive pivot, very, very large, very tough. I wouldn't expect any issues. Contained within it are thrust bearings. So you've got a bearing system, which makes for a smoother operation. It doubles as your lock bar stabilizer. You don't need a separate one like what Hinderer uses. And I'm not knocking Hinderer for their style, obviously. He invented that, and a lot of people have adopted it because it works very, very well. I'm just saying it's ingenious to do it all in one. The other thing is your blade stop is built into here as well. So this one piece is doing three different things. It's your main pivot, it's your blade stop, both for closing and opening, and it's your lock bar over travel preventer. Here, you're going to have, obviously, your stop pin for your blade is there. And it works on the closing right there. So I'm not saying that's a bad thing to have. I just think it's rather efficient and quite smart the way that Dave did that. Now, the contours are a little bit different. If you really look at these, while yes, when they're separate, you look at this and go, boy, that looks a lot like a Hinderer XM-18. But when you put them side by side and you really take a good look, you see there actually are pretty dramatic differences. Again, the overall profile is the same. The Hinderer is definitely more curved, has more of an organic shape. You still got some nice curvature to the frame, to the handles on the F3, no problem there. Dave has a huge choil here. And again, if it's really built up behind the pivot, I don't know that you really want to consider it quote-unquote choil, but it's big enough, even in this 3.5 version, to almost put 2 fingers into. So there's a lot of room in there. Whereas the frame on the XM-18 is pretty standard. A 1-finger hollow, and then your forward choil there. Let's get into the thickness differences. The Hinderer is considerably thicker, both in the actual titanium being used, and it might trick you a little bit when you're looking at it on camera because Rick Hinderer does a nice radius here. The tie is actually coming out all the way out to here. Your eye kind of goes there. So the actual titanium slabs are thicker. The blade stock is slimmer than Dave's. So the F3 has slightly thicker blade stock. The weight difference, honestly, there's really not much of a weight difference. If anything, the Hinderer may be just very slightly lighter. Bowler N690 on the F3 and the new S35 VN changeover for the Hinderer. Both super quality steels. Some people are going to prefer one over the other. I think it's a personal preference. I think it's going to be depending on how you use it. For me as an EDC, I could go either way. Great edge retention on both. I'm not too worried about anything. One big plus for me on the Hinderer is having a lanyard hole. You don't have that on the Curtis. Now, if you opted for the back spacer, you're screwed. If you get the standoffs like I did, yeah, you could loop a lanyard around the rear furthermost. But I don't know that I really want to do that. And it's really weird. I don't have a set reason as to why I put a lanyard on one knife over the other. Once I handle it for a few minutes, I decide whether that's going to get a lanyard or not. So I don't know if I'm going to put a lanyard on my Hinderer yet or not. I'm not entirely certain. On my XM24, I didn't put a lanyard on that one. For whatever reason, I just liked it. I liked the feel of it, the draw out of the pocket without needing to have the lanyard on there. How I'm going to feel about the 3.5 inch, I don't know yet. As far as lockup and the lock geometry, I mean, Hinderer is certainly no slouch in that department. I like Dave's lockup geometry. That's never going to move. That is always going to lock up in the same spot, always. The Hinderer is going to break in a little bit, and there's a couple of good reasons for that. it's really going to depend on how much you're playing with it. But I think overall in the end, if I kept, really? Proper grammar there, genius. If I kept both of these for 10 years and used them fairly often, I feel, for whatever reason, and maybe it's unfounded, I feel that the F3 is going to have more of a solid lock in the future without really deviating. Now again, it's locking up later right now than the Hinderer currently does. I don't think it's going to move. But then again, Hinderers don't really have a bad reputation for their lockup. They have a bad reputation for their detent and for a knife that doesn't really flip. You give a little bit of wrist action. And I gotta be honest with you, for the very first day out of the box, this may have been flipped 50 times. It's not doing too bad, but I really am having to put effort into it. And the problem is the way you have to engage the flipper mechanism on a Hinderer, you have to push it downward and a little bit forward. You can't just slide your finger back. But what happens is, when you do that, you're jamming your finger into the jimping over and over. Let me let the skin kind of puff back out and get back to normal. Okay, so watch. Just from doing one simple push. Now again, that's not the worst thing in the world, but if you're the kind, like me, that likes to sit there and play with your knife a lot, this is gonna agitate you over time. It really is. With the F3, it's just simple, pull straight back. And you can do the straight down if you want. It's a little bit harder though. But you break that detent and it just flies open. His detent is perfect. And that flips the exact same way it did the day that I bought it, the day that I received it. It flipped the exact same way. There was no break-in required. So far, this thing has held an edge fantastically. Only had it about 2 weeks. I've not had to do any stropping on it yet, though, which I think is pretty impressive. I love the overall fit and finish on Dave's product. It's not a comparison right there because, as we all know, the fit and finish on a Hinderer is also fantastic. His stonewash is nice, clean. I already switched the pocket clip over. I despise tip-down carry. That's just a personal preference. I really do like his hardware. Now, there's a plus and minus to that, too. I like the fact that Dave's knife is pretty sanitary. You only have 3 points of contact, your pivot and your 2 standoffs. That's different now, of course, if you have the backspacer. And that's an option. You can go with a titanium backspacer or the steel standoffs. With the Hinderer, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 points of contact. Not the worst thing in the world. I love the custom screws that they use. Now here's the problem. On my XM-24, one of these was stripped. So I contacted Hinderer. Rob Orlando emailed me back. And he says, yeah, we can sell you a screw, but we can't sell you the barrel. It's a proprietary component that we don't ship to people. I guess they feel the counterfeiters don't actually get a real Hinderer in their hands and then copy the parts. Duh, yeah, they do. I only asked for one. I said, I'll pay whatever you want. I don't want a full set where if I was a counterfeiter, I'm building a knife and using your components. I get that. But they refused to sell me one. He says, if you want to send the knife in to us, which is a 2-week turnaround at minimum, we'll put that in for you. I said, you know what? Screw it. I'll live with it. I'll Loctite it, and I just won't change out my scales anymore. Whatever. I wasn't really too impressed with that. I understand the reasoning, but I think that's a little bit over the top, especially if somebody just needs one. That's not going to be a counterfeiting issue. I like the jimping that they use. It's not overly aggressive, but you do feel it. Again, it's a little bit of a pain in the ass on the flipper. But, you know, when you're actually using the knife, it's going to be very, very functional. I'd prefer to have a little bit of jimping right here, because if you are choked up on it, you don't really have, you know, any traction there at all. Nice smooth operation. Mine actually has a pretty decent detent. So I think once it's broken in, it's going to end up flipping pretty nicely. The fit and finish on both is exemplary. something I think beyond what you would typically get in their price ranges, or actually what you would expect to get in the F3 price range, let's put it that way. I really think it's a personal preference between the two. I personally think the better value 100% goes to the Curtis F3. I think this is one I would tend to abuse a little bit more, and that's a different mentality than a lot of people that are buying Hinderers. A lot of people are buying them for investment. A lot of people are buying them to be safe queens because of their limited availability, because of the very high secondary market prices that they're commanding due to that limited availability. So not as many people are using this for its intended purpose as you would expect. I would certainly have no problem doing any hard duty with this, but the handle being just a little bit smaller, see what I'm saying right here, as compared to, that fills up the hand nicely. That little bit of extra thickness gives you a little bit more purchase on the knife. I think this is a little bit more geared toward hard use. If I were comparing the 4-inch versus the XM-24, I think that might be a little bit different for me. This does feel slimmer in the hand. It's slicker because it's completely smooth on this stonewash. Now he does offer a frag type of texture on one of the titanium scales, one of the titanium options, I should say. So you would regain that traction. So again, that's a choice. If you felt I need a knife that I can get a certain degree of traction on, you wouldn't order the stonewash. You would order the frag version. So that part would be eliminated. Very basic pivot. You know, I discussed this on the XM-24. You know, that does not scream high-end knife, but it's extraordinarily practical for use in the field. You know, you're just out in the middle of the woods. You're doing some hiking. You're doing some camping. You're splitting up some wood. Chop up a little bit of wood for firewood. You're I don't know. You're shaving down some wood to make stakes out of or something. And your pivot comes loose. You grab a coin out of your pocket or a screwdriver from anywhere, any flat thing, and you can tighten this back down. You know, assuming this isn't going to start moving. And really, you can make shift with a flathead screwdriver on this as well. It's not quite like a Strider pivot. Now, Dave was pretty smart. He's using a custom pivot, and you get that custom pivot look, and it looks expensive, but you could still use a flathead screwdriver in there. Now, out in the field, you're not carrying a screwdriver. All you have is a coin in your pocket. This is going to be the pivot you wish you had, not this one. You're not going to get a coin down in there at all. But still very, very useful, and still not a complete proprietary pivot like a lot of brands are doing. So yeah, that may not look impressive, but again, this was a knife designed for utility, not for beauty. And I think Dave has the combination of the two. This is a friggin' beautiful knife. Obviously, I had mine custom embellished with the blow torching on the hardware there. But you can also do the same thing with Hinderer. Now, the really cool thing with Hinderer is, you know, you can customize this like crazy. They have different pocket clips you can buy, different anodized pocket clips. Same thing for the space filler. You could buy different standoffs, either blue titanium or the bronze titanium. You have a number of different scales in G10, several colors to choose from, as well as they do runs of carbon fiber. My Hinderer carbon fiber scale arrives tomorrow. You can accessorize this like crazy. They've also kind of teamed up with Steel Flame, and they have custom pocket clips, custom nuts that you can put on here with skulls or horse heads or whatnot. Really cool stuff. And there's a lot you can do just by buying a couple of accessories. Dave doesn't offer any of that. He doesn't have time for that. I mean, he's a one-man operation, custom manufacturer. This is a whole team on a real production piece, semi-custom at best. This is full custom. Again, because he's not outsourcing. You want to say mid-tech, you really want to say mid-tech, but mid-tech really, by clear definition, by Ken Onion's definition anyway, is outsourcing any components to be done by someone else. Dave Curtis is the only person working on this knife because he owns the water jet company. He water jets his own handles, his own materials. Everything is done by him. Every screw on this knife was turned by Dave Curtis. I do not believe anything was touched at all by Rick Hinderer on this. Now, I do know he does final edge on a lot of the knives, just not all of them. Hey, who knows? Mine might have a Hinderer hand-done edge. I don't know. I'll never know. So there again, I think there's a little bit better value here. So anyway, that was just a little side-by-side comparison, as direct as I can be. Figure out which way you want to go. I'm tossed up. That's why I have both. If it came down to it and I was going to get rid of one, there's where I would be. So by a hair, I would still choose the Curtis F3 over the Hinderer for an EDC kind of task. If I was a fireman, if I was out in the shit, if I was law enforcement, if I was in construction, I might give the slight nod over to the Hinderer. If I crack this scale, if I break this scale, I pay $65 and get a new one. I destroy that scale, I don't even want to know what Dave would charge to replace that. And I'm sure he'd be fair, but there's going to be some cost involved to titanium. So whichever way you want to go, hopefully that helped you a little tiny bit, giving you a true side-by-side, giving you good comparison between the two and my personal thoughts. If you have any comments or questions, or you think I'm insane and I'm heavily biased one over the other, which I don't think I am, I think I'm being pretty fair, let me know in the comments down below. Until next time, I'll be seeing you around.